Boeing, one of the most prominent names in the aviation industry, is now facing a severe crisis as U.S. tariffs and political policies wreak havoc on its operations. The company's shadow factories, hidden behind complex trade maneuvers, are now under intense scrutiny, and the challenges are mounting. With rising production costs and a shrinking market, Boeing is struggling not only to maintain its position in the aviation industry, but also to cope with the unforeseen consequences of trade policies and tariffs. Meanwhile, international competitors, particularly from Canada, are seizing this opportunity to dominate the market and even take over a significant portion of the aviation industry. These issues are not only affecting Boeing, but also prompting the entire U.S. economy to reconsider its trade strategies and sustainable growth practices moving forward. This is not just Boeing's story. It's a major lesson for the entire American industry. Surprised by these revelations? Comment 1 if you agree with the impact of tariffs on Boeing, or 0 if you have a different perspective. Don't forget to like, share this video, and hit the subscribe button for more breaking news coming soon. Now let's dive into this intriguing story. The tragic incident involving the Boeing 737 MAX has become one of the biggest crises in aviation history, not only due to the loss of lives, but also because of the far-reaching impact it had on the economy, politics, and the reputation of one of the world's largest corporations. This event serves as a costly lesson about the importance of maintaining safety standards, social responsibility, and transparency in business. From the first crash of Lion Air Flight 610 in October 2018 to the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 disaster, in March 2019, Boeing faced a series of serious issues related to product quality and safety inspection procedures. As a result, over 340 people lost their lives, thousands of flights were canceled, and Boeing faced enormous compensation claims. However, what made this incident particularly severe was how Boeing handled the crisis. Mistakes in failing to recognize technical faults early on, combined with a lack of transparency in reports to authorities and the public, worsened the situation. Boeing's internal issues were not limited to the product itself, but also related to urgent production decisions, as well as pressure from politicians and regulatory bodies. The suspension of 737 MAX operations by the U.S. government and international regulatory agencies not only affected the aviation industry, but also raised questions about the oversight and control within the industry. Thus, the first lesson is that transparency and accountability are key to maintaining public and partner trust. An undeniable factor in this crisis was its political impact. Boeing is one of the most important companies in the U.S., not only because it creates tens of thousands of jobs, but also because of its critical defense contracts. Therefore, the 737 MAX crisis was not just a matter for one company, but a global political issue. The delay in addressing technical issues and the failure to take responsibility from the outset led to Boeing losing support from politicians and international governments, escalating tensions between countries and trade agreements. This proves that quick and accurate decisions in a crisis are crucial for maintaining stability and international cooperation. Finally, the biggest lesson we can learn from this crisis is that maintaining and enhancing safety standards is not a choice but a responsibility. A single mistake in the safety inspection process can lead to catastrophic consequences. Therefore, companies must not only ensure the quality of their products, but also build a strong organizational culture that is willing to admit mistakes and continuously improve to prevent future errors. For Boeing, the 737 MAX crisis was not just an economic failure, but also a warning about the importance of transparency, decisiveness in crisis management, and maintaining public trust. For other companies and organizations, this serves as a valuable lesson that safety and quality cannot be overlooked in any decision-making process. In 2020, President Donald Trump made one of the most shocking decisions for the global economy, imposing a 200% tariff on aircraft manufactured outside the U.S. This move, while aimed at protecting domestic manufacturing, triggered a series of far-reaching effects on airline companies and the global industry, including Boeing, one of America's largest names. Immediately, Boeing, which had long relied on global supply chains, faced serious challenges when it could no longer produce aircraft at reasonable costs in international factories. In this context, the company was forced to shift part of its production to Mexico, where labor costs were lower and less affected by U.S. tariff measures. However, this decision was not just a cost-saving strategy, but also brought many unintended consequences. One of the most significant outcomes of outsourcing production was the loss of jobs in the U.S. Although moving production to Mexico helped Boeing save costs, it meant the loss of thousands of jobs at factories and production facilities in the U.S. This led to dissatisfaction among many workers and labor unions, who felt abandoned by the policy, especially as the U.S. economy was still struggling in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. These changes sparked widespread public outrage and diminished trust in the U.S. government's commitment to protecting workers. Additionally, the relocation of production abroad brought about a shift in the global supply chain. The move to produce aircraft in Mexico placed Boeing in a difficult position in terms of managing and coordinating international suppliers. Supply chain disruptions, particularly during the pandemic, increased production costs and forced Boeing to face shortages of critical components. This not only impacted the company's production capacity, but also caused major disruptions to the global aviation industry. Another key factor to consider is the relationship between the U.S. and its trade partners. The decision to impose a 200% tariff further strained relations between the U.S. and many countries, especially partners in the aviation industry. Countries like those in Europe and China, which host major aircraft manufacturers like Airbus, strongly criticized this decision and retaliated with countermeasures. This not only affected trade deals but also put Boeing in an increasingly competitive position, more intense than ever before. The ongoing trade war between the U.S. and China, spanning several years, has not only affected the macroeconomy, but also had a profound impact on specific industries, including aviation. One of the most striking examples is the severe situation Boeing faced when China decided to stop accepting Boeing aircraft and halt purchasing American-made components. This was a decisive move amidst growing trade tensions, and it resulted in significant consequences for both Boeing and the U.S. economy as a whole. Boeing, one of the U.S.'s top exporters, was severely impacted when China, one of their largest markets, decided to cease purchasing aircraft and parts from the U.S. Prior to the trade tensions, China had been a key customer for Boeing, with thousands of aircraft orders each year. However, under the pressure of tariff policies and political confrontation, China began seeking alternatives, including increasing cooperation with Airbus, Boeing's biggest competitor. This not only reduced Boeing's revenue but also led to a freeze in aircraft orders, directly affecting the company's production and supply chain. Boeing factories in the U.S., especially in states with large Boeing workforces, faced a significant decline in orders, putting thousands of jobs at risk. The stagnation in production became not just a corporate issue but a major local economic problem, as communities heavily dependent on Boeing for jobs and income were also affected. Moreover, China's retaliatory measures also sparked a crisis in the supply chain. Aircraft components made in the U.S. could no longer be exported to China, forcing Boeing to find ways to rely on suppliers from other countries, causing major disruptions in production and rising costs. Additionally, the shortage of key components from the U.S. increased Boeing's reliance on other suppliers, creating instability across the entire aircraft manufacturing system. The trade tensions between the U.S. and China also had far-reaching consequences globally, as international companies in the aviation sector began adjusting their procurement and collaboration strategies. Countries like Canada, the UK, and others in Europe quickly ramped up partnerships with Airbus to leverage advantages in price and quality, while reducing dependence on Boeing's products. This not only harmed Boeing's market share, but also rendered U.S. protectionist policies less effective in the face of global competition. From this trade conflict, it is clear that political decisions and tariffs do not only have immediate effects, but also leave long-lasting consequences. While protectionist measures may provide short-term benefits, they also create significant long-term risks as trade partners seek to reduce reliance on the U.S. The trade tensions not only disrupted the supply chain, but also harmed businesses, causing the economy to pay a heavy price for short-sighted political strategies. The confrontation between President Donald Trump and Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg, who replaced Kelly Ortberg, who left the CEO position before this time, during the 737 MAX crisis became one of the most intense and pivotal moments for both the aviation industry and U.S. politics. As Boeing faced severe consequences from the 737 MAX crashes and pressure from the government, the relationship between President Trump and the CEO of Boeing evolved into a high-stakes battle of wits, fraught with tension. The phone call was reportedly extremely tense, with Trump expressing deep frustration over Boeing's crisis and demanding the company outline a clear plan to restore public and customer confidence. The president emphasized that Boeing's collapse could have serious repercussions for the U.S. economy and damage its credibility with international partners, particularly as the U.S. was already engaged in a tense trade war with China. However, CEO Dennis Muilenburg, who replaced Kelly Ortberg, refused to concede to the president's pressure. He firmly stated that Boeing's strategy would not be dictated by political factors, but instead would focus on global competition and the company's survival. Muilenburg made it clear that Boeing could not be influenced by external factors like politics and must stand strong against all challenges through technological innovation, improved product quality, and maintaining its commitment to customers. This stance clearly reflected Boeing's strategy to maintain independence and autonomy in its business decisions. Muilenburg's declaration that the company would not allow politics to alter its course, even when under intense government pressure, was a defining statement, not only for Boeing but for the aviation industry as a whole. This phone call was not merely a dispute about Boeing's internal issues, but symbolized the broader relationship between politics and business in the modern world. The tension underscored an important issue. How can companies maintain their independence and commitment to their core values when faced with political pressures and external influences? Muilenburg made it clear that Boeing's survival should not be determined by politicians, but by the company's creativity, innovation, and unwavering determination. However, this confrontation also highlighted the difficulties large corporations face when political and trade factors intermingle with decision-making. Like many companies, Boeing had to find a way to balance its business interests with political demands, ensuring that their decisions were not overly influenced by external factors. The global crisis has not only impacted the U.S. economy, but also increased tensions in international trade, particularly after President Donald Trump's administration imposed strong tariff policies to protect domestic manufacturing. These tariffs not only raised production and export costs, but also caused significant disruptions in the supply chain, forcing many companies, including Boeing, to adapt and pivot in the face of adversity. Meanwhile, countries in South and Southeast Asia found opportunities to grow and expand their markets. Boeing, which was heavily affected by tariffs and order stagnation from China and Europe, had to quickly seek solutions to maintain growth and offset losses from traditional markets. One of the key strategies Boeing adopted was expanding into new markets, particularly in South and Southeast Asia, where the aviation industry was booming and the demand for aircraft was steadily increasing. Boeing made significant efforts to shift its focus to new markets such as India, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam, countries with large populations and rapidly growing economies. These markets not only had a rising demand for passenger transport, but were also investing heavily in aviation infrastructure. With appropriate strategies, Boeing achieved some success in expanding its presence in these regions, securing new orders that helped alleviate the negative impact from traditional markets. However, increasing its presence in new regions has not been without challenges. Boeing faced fierce competition from Airbus, its primary competitor in the aviation industry. Airbus had a strong customer base in these regions and was intensifying its competitive strategies. Boeing not only had to compete on price, but also needed to prove the quality and reliability of its products. This required the company to make improvements in technology and manufacturing processes, as well as build strong relationships with airlines and local governments. In addition, geopolitical factors and changes in trade policies also significantly affected Boeing's operations in new markets. While some countries in South and Southeast Asia offered favorable conditions for aircraft imports, new trade policies and tariffs from these nations could pose risks to costs and profits in the future. Therefore, maintaining good working relationships with local governments and partners is essential for Boeing to achieve stability and long-term growth in these regions. If you agree with Boeing's strategies in expanding into new markets and facing the crisis, don't forget to leave a like and share this video with your friends. Comment 1 if you agree, or 0 if you have a different opinion. Be sure to click subscribe to support us and stay updated with our upcoming exciting videos. Let's continue following the developments in this story together. The strategy of protecting domestic production, particularly through measures such as tariffs, is one of the tools governments use to safeguard local industries and reduce reliance on imported goods. However, while the goal of these policies is to stimulate the domestic economy, such measures do not always provide long-term benefits for the economy and U.S. companies. On the contrary, they can result in serious consequences, especially for businesses and global customers. A clear example of the negative impacts of tariffs is the feedback from global customers such as Ryanair, one of Europe's largest low-cost airlines. Ryanair, along with many other airlines, has raised concerns about the negative effects of tariff increases on their production costs and ticket prices. The rise in the cost of components and aircraft due to tariffs has increased operational costs for airlines, forcing them to reconsider their procurement strategies and affecting profitability. This clearly shows that tariffs do not only affect manufacturing companies but also disrupt industries linked to importing goods from the U.S. Protecting domestic production through tariffs, while potentially helping the domestic industry maintain a competitive position, raises a larger question about the cost and long-term effectiveness of this strategy. One of the key issues is the increase in costs. When tariffs are imposed, companies face higher prices for products and components, which not only affects the final sale price, but also reduces the competitiveness of U.S. products in international markets. This is particularly problematic for industries like aviation, where the cost of aircraft components can make up a significant portion of total production costs. Additionally, one of the most significant negative consequences of protecting domestic production is the loss of international trade relationships. Countries and trade partners, when faced with such protectionist policies, may retaliate by imposing tariffs on U.S. products or seeking alternative suppliers. This not only diminishes the competitive advantage of U.S. companies, but also causes disruptions in global supply chains, especially as the global economy becomes increasingly interconnected. Maintaining domestic production does have advantages, particularly in protecting local jobs and ensuring national security. But these benefits need to be weighed against the long-term negative consequences. While the domestic production protection strategy may help reduce trade deficits and create jobs in manufacturing, it can also lead to inefficiencies in production when companies cannot fully leverage global resources and technologies. Large investments in infrastructure and technology may be delayed or minimized due to rising costs, leading to a less competitive economy. The economic recession in the U.S. has had far-reaching effects, not only on the domestic economy but also on the global economy. In this context, the U.S. is grappling with a series of significant challenges, including rising unemployment, high production costs, and particularly political instability, an element that directly impacts critical industries such as tourism and many other sectors. Rising unemployment is one of the most visible consequences of this economic downturn. Although the U.S. has made efforts to recover in recent years, these efforts have not been strong enough to mitigate the negative effects of the crisis. Businesses, especially small and medium-sized companies, have faced reduced consumer demand, leading to layoffs, work stoppages, and widespread redundancies. High unemployment not only affects the lives of millions of Americans, but also diminishes purchasing power within the economy, making recovery even more difficult. In addition to unemployment, the high cost of production is another critical factor contributing to the economic downturn. U.S. manufacturing companies are facing rising costs due to inflation, soaring energy prices, and skyrocketing raw material costs. Protectionist measures like tariffs have not fully addressed these issues, and in fact, they have added additional burdens on businesses. When production costs rise, companies not only need to cut costs, but also face the need to raise product prices, which further reduces the competitiveness of American businesses in international markets. Another unavoidable factor in this recession is political instability. Domestic political turmoil has created an unstable environment, severely affecting investment and development decisions. Investors and international businesses are becoming more cautious when dealing with the U.S., as they cannot predict changes in policies and potential economic measures. This instability also makes it harder for the U.S. to maintain international partnerships, leading to a weakening of key areas such as trade, technology, and scientific research. The U.S. tourism industry is one of the sectors most directly affected by the economic downturn and political instability. The U.S. economy, once one of the most attractive tourist destinations in the world, is now facing a severe decline in international visitors. Famous tourist destinations like New York, Washington, D.C., and major entertainment areas in California and Florida are witnessing a significant drop in tourists, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic and rising political tensions. This not only impacts businesses in the tourism industry, but also reduces tax revenues and negatively affects related service industries such as hotels, restaurants, and entertainment venues. The impact of the economic recession in the U.S. is not limited to national borders, but has spread globally. The global economy has faced serious disruptions as America's major trade partners, from China to European countries, are also affected by the decline in consumption and production in the U.S. These countries are also facing reduced demand for exports and instability in global supply chains, leading to stagnation in their industries as well. Amid growing trade and political tensions between the U.S. and Canada, Canada has not only played the role of a key trade partner, but also established itself as a formidable economic competitor, ready to confront and adapt to challenges posed by tariffs and protectionist policies imposed by the U.S. With the goal of safeguarding its domestic economy and reducing dependence on the U.S. market, Canada has implemented a strategic investment and industry diversification plan to restore and build a resilient, self-sustaining economy. Prime Minister Mark Carney, known for his strategic vision and experience in global finance, has led efforts to rebuild Canada's economy after the negative impacts of U.S. tariff policies. As head of government, Carney recognized that Canada could not continue to rely on a single market, especially the U.S., if it wished to maintain stability and long-term growth. Therefore, he launched a series of strategic investment projects focusing on the development of various industries, from technology and renewable energy to manufacturing and agriculture. A key point in Carney's strategy was investment in innovation and technology. Instead of relying solely on traditional industries like oil and mining, the Canadian government intensified its efforts in high-tech fields such as information technology, artificial intelligence, and renewable energy. These initiatives not only helped diversify the economy, but also enabled Canada to create new industries less affected by external factors, like U.S. tariff policies. Additionally, responding to U.S. tariffs became a central element in Canada's development strategy. Carney recognized that Canada could not remain passive when the U.S. imposed tariffs on its exports, particularly since Canada was one of the U.S.'s largest trade partners. Rather than solely relying on trade negotiations, Canada proactively sought new markets, especially in Asia and Europe. Signing free trade agreements with other countries and regions not only helped reduce dependence on the U.S., but also expanded export opportunities for Canadian industries. Industry diversification became an essential part of Carney's strategy to mitigate the negative impacts of U.S. tariffs and protectionist measures. As the U.S. market shrank due to these policies, Canada's expansion into other sectors, such as food processing, pharmaceuticals, and consumer products, created new opportunities for Canadian businesses and reduced risks associated with reliance on a single market. Under Mark Carney's leadership, Canada successfully built a stronger, less externally dependent economy with the ability to stand independently. The decisions to invest in diversified industries and strategies to tackle tariffs have not only allowed Canada to maintain growth, but also elevated its position on the global stage. While the U.S. economy faces numerous challenges, from domestic production declines to trade tensions, Canada has firmly established itself and built an independent economy, reducing reliance on traditional markets, especially the U.S. By diversifying its industries, boosting investment in technology, and seeking new markets, Canada has quickly overcome difficulties, creating a robust and sustainable economy. One of Canada's successful strategies has been strengthening international cooperation and not relying on a single trade partner. Canada has signed trade agreements with numerous countries and regions around the world, minimizing the impact of U.S. protectionist policies and tariffs. In addition, the Canadian government has made substantial investments in high-tech industries, renewable energy, and manufacturing to create a more diverse economy that is no longer dependent on single industries like oil or minerals. This shift has allowed Canada to develop new industries, including the aviation sector, where Boeing and Airbus are major competitors. However, an important element in international relations is the $119 billion F-35 contract, a defense cooperation agreement between the U.S. and its allies, including Canada. Under the influence of U.S. trade policies and tariffs, this contract is now at risk, as Canada no longer wants to maintain an over-reliance on the U.S. for large defense projects. The F-35 contract is not only one of the most important defense deals between the U.S. and Canada, but also symbolizes international cooperation in the security field. However, the failures in U.S. foreign and trade policies have highlighted serious issues in the relationship between the two nations, especially when the U.S. fails to maintain stability in its policies and Canada actively seeks other partners to replace the U.S. in major projects. For Canada, the pursuit of new markets not only in the region but also in Asia, Europe, and particularly India and Southeast Asia has created new opportunities. Canada has shifted strongly toward other trade partners, creating new export opportunities and no longer being reliant on the U.S. economy as it once was. This further demonstrates that Canada has succeeded in building an independent economy, reducing dependence on the U.S., while expanding economic opportunities with other nations and regions. The economic relationship between the U.S. and Canada, once regarded as one of the strongest and most stable partnerships in the world, has faced serious challenges in recent years. Canada no longer trusts the reliability of purchasing aircraft from the U.S., especially after the volatility in trade policies, tariffs, and the instability of political decisions from the U.S. government. These factors have shifted Canada's perception of the U.S. from a trusted partner to an unpredictable one, increasing concerns about the potential negative impacts on Canada's economy and its strategic industries. In this context, Canada has started to seek alternative trade partners, reducing its dependence on the U.S. The aviation industry, particularly aircraft purchases, has become a prime example. Whereas Canada previously had close cooperation with U.S. aircraft manufacturers like Boeing, this is no longer the preferred option. The political instability in the U.S., along with issues related to tariffs and protectionist policies, has prompted Canada to reassess alternatives to ensure stability and reliability in crucial economic transactions. Rather than continuing to rely on a partner subject to so much volatility, Canada is seeking new trade opportunities in countries unaffected by the protectionist policies of the U.S., Brazil, and other nations in Latin America, Asia, and Europe have emerged as potential partners, where new economic opportunities are being explored. Brazil, with its rapidly growing economy and large demand for technology, aircraft, and industrial goods, has become a key destination in Canada's market expansion strategy. Countries like India, China, and ASEAN partners are also regions where Canada is actively seeking collaboration opportunities. Signing free trade agreements and pushing forward investment projects in these nations help Canada mitigate risks stemming from the instability with the U.S. and pursue more sustainable development opportunities. One of the main reasons Canada is seeking new opportunities is the need for stability in economic relations. While the U.S. currently faces major changes in policies and markets, partners like Brazil, Europe, and Asia offer more stability in trade partnerships, less influenced by tariffs or political uncertainty. These countries have open economic policies, are ready to cooperate in fields like technology, agriculture, and industrial production, and provide a favorable environment for Canada's economic development. The decision to stop relying on purchasing aircraft from the U.S., combined with the search for new trade partners, represents a strong shift in Canada's economic development strategy. Canada has clearly recognized that sustainable growth cannot be based on a single market, but must expand its economic relationships, seeking stability and reliability in international dealings. As a result, Canada is building a more independent economy, less reliant on one trade partner, and ready to capitalize on opportunities from countries unaffected by the political fluctuations of the U.S. The loss of trust from international trade partners, particularly Canada, has become a crucial factor reshaping the future of the U.S. economy. The F-35 contract, one of the largest defense deals between the U.S. and its allied nations, is at risk of being canceled as Canada and other countries begin to seek alternative opportunities. Political instability and changes in U.S. trade policies have caused these nations to lose confidence in the stability and consistency of U.S. commitments. International negotiations are no longer as straightforward as before, as many countries start searching for substitute partners, marking a new chapter in global trade relations. The U.S. must rebuild the trust it has lost if it does not want to be excluded from global trade opportunities. The imposition of tariffs and protectionist policies has weakened the U.S.'s competitiveness on the international stage and caused negative impacts not only on major companies like Boeing, but also on the economy as a whole. Trust is a core element in any international transaction, and when the stability of the U.S. economy is shaken, trade partners will not hesitate to seek less risky markets. In this context, the U.S. must re-establish its economic and trade relationships with partner nations, especially those impacted by its trade policies. This requires not only a strategic diplomatic approach, but also the improvement of trade and tariff policies to ensure that the U.S. economy can maintain its competitive position in today's globalized environment. Additionally, the U.S. needs to shift focus towards sectors like technology, innovation, and renewable energy to reduce dependence on traditional manufacturing industries and enhance its competitive edge. Rebuilding trust is not only about adjusting policies, but also about a long-term shift in how the U.S. approaches and engages with the global economy. The future of the U.S. economy will depend on its ability to re-establish strong international relationships, while creating a stable and sustainable environment for businesses and trade partners. If the U.S. can restore trust and maintain flexible economic strategies, it will continue to hold its position as one of the world's largest and most influential economies. However, without significant change, the U.S. may face exclusion from global trade opportunities, which could severely impact the economy's development in the future. Thank you for watching the video. If you agree with these insights, don't forget to leave a like and share this video so others can see it. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on our in-depth analyses and the latest news. Leave your thoughts in the comments below.